And we're live. It is Thursday, January 23rd, the year of our Lord 2025. It is cold outside, but the sun is shining, the birds are chirping. It's going to be a great effing day because you are watching Dog Shirt
Oh,
TV.
did you not want the cactus? You
No, the
want the
cactus.
cactus?
Run the
Okay.
cactus.
Oh, now
Hosting Dog Shirt TV, an effing revolution in morning television.
Is an effing revolution in morning television. I gotta say, it is day 4 of the Trump presidency. America is almost great again. We're almost there. And you know, I'm here at the cabin in the woods where there are no floors. There's no furniture. It's like camping. Um,
what do you
and
mean there's no floors? Are you just like on dirt?
No, I'm on plywood.
Oh,
That's a
And I can't
floor in
put
my
any
book. I
furniture
grew up in
in
Africa.
because I would
That's a
just have to pick it up because there's no floors, and building the floors is the first step. So we got a mattress on the floor, which the dog loves because then he can leap on me anytime. And we're not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to retreat from society and do Dog Shirt TV from the cabin in the woods. Um, we have an amazing guest today, people, and
yes.
the more time I spend talking, the more time I'm going to steal from your time with her. I'm going to have Holly introduce Sheila Wray Gregoire. Is that how we pronounce it?
yeah, it's pretty good. That's
All
pretty
right.
good. French Canadian
French
name.
Canadian.
Yep.
Oh, well,
Yet
Hmm.
another French Canadian. We have another French Canadian in our,
Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
our first Quebecois guest, and you are not here. I'm going to text you to annoy you about this while Holly introduces our guest. Holly, please.
Yeah, so Sheila Wray Gregoire is a best-selling author in the Christian world, and she writes about marriage and sex geared for that audience, and specifically counters all the damaging crap that is out there, misogynistic crap that is out there, with rigorous social science research. And she's making a big difference out there in the world, in a culture that doesn't like to hear truth, isn't terribly fond of change. And if you tuned in last week, was it last week, when we talked about the porn purity culture nexus, I cited her, and I also cited her for a Bulwark piece that I wrote last week that you may have seen. So we just thought, let's just have her on and introduce you because she is the woman. And welcome, Sheila.
Thank
What
you.
add about yourself that I didn't say?
Oh gosh. Well, I am Canadian, eh? So we're just sitting up here waiting for the tariffs. You know, our premier study is going to turn off power to Michigan if they happen. So, yeah.
Well, remember us when we're all fleeing the roundups and the camps for the
Hmm.
dissenters. Maybe you can have like an underground
Yeah,
tunnel.
we'll be the Underground Railroad again. We'll be the final destination again.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, thank you so much for coming on, and I'm thrilled to have more people know about your work. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about how this all started and how you got involved in taking on the evangelical patriarchy.
Yeah, well, okay. So I have always believed that men and women are equal, which does not sound
Revolutionary.
revolutionary, but it is in evangelicalism because in evangelicalism, there's a doctrine which is called complementarianism. And there's two different forms of it. There's one that says that men are in authority in the church, so women can't be pastors or elders, or even teach teenage boys in Sunday school. And then there's one that says that men are in authority in marriage, so they get to make the final decisions, and the wife can't be disrespectful and correct her husband. And those things, you could be one or the other, but often you're both. And so I have always not believed either of those things. I
Are you, what is your relationship with evangelicalism other than not believing those two things?
Okay, well, that's what I want to say. So I never believed that, but I grew up in evangelicalism and I was teaching at marriage conferences and I was writing books about marriage in evangelicalism. I was on Focus on the Family. Like I appeared on Focus on the Family 3 different times throughout the aughts and into the early 2010s. So I was like in that world and I was friends with all the authors. I just didn't believe and I wasn't teaching exactly that stuff, right? I was kind of adjacent, but I was on all the media. And then one day in 2019, I read one of the most toxic books I've ever seen, which is Love and Respect. And I completely freaked out because I had known this stuff was toxic, but I hadn't read it all because I was afraid of plagiarizing. So I hadn't realized how toxic this was. And when I realized how toxic it was, we freaked out. We wrote letters to Focus on the Family and Jim Daly because I knew him and he blew me off. And so we just decided to go big or go home. So we thought, well, we're just going to do a huge research project and prove them wrong. And that's what we did. We surveyed 20,000 women for our first study. What's that?
Is that a royal we or
No? Okay, so I had working for me at the time my daughter Rebecca. So we do sex research together, mother-daughter team. So
Not at all awkward, I'm sure.
no, it's super fun. But she was a psychology grad. She had specialized in psychometrics, so she knew a lot about survey design. I also had working for me a young woman who was a master's in epidemiology and was a statistician and had written a lot of peer-reviewed papers with stats and was familiar with all the stats programs. So together, we did this huge survey. And we were just showing how the stuff that's taught in evangelicalism really hurts women. And we follow that up with several other surveys. We've now surveyed about 40,000 people and just shown that, yeah, the stuff that is taught in evangelicalism does serious harm to women. It does it to men too, but especially to women, and it does not lead to good outcomes.
Okay, so I have so many questions. But the first one, as somebody who would love to run surveys of 20,000, 40,000 people, but is consistently price inhibited by that, how do you fund a survey of, like, where does the money for this come from?
Well, we did it on a shoestring. So about 40% of that 20,000 came from my social media channels. And then we also offered incentives to people to recruit people themselves. So we did it was called a snowball sampling method. Basically, we recruited other people to recruit other people, and then they could win prizes. Like they could talk to me for an hour. Which people thought was a fun thing. I don't know.
And security lawyers, if you give them the opportunity to talk to me for an hour, they will not do a lawfare survey on that basis.
Yeah. But anyway, but we had a lot of people who really liked
national security fake lawyers. So
yeah. And then I recruited a lot of influencers. So remember, I was in the middle of this world, right? So I recruited a lot of people who also taught about marriage to get people. And so some of the authors we ended up criticizing in the Great Sex Rescue actually recruited people for our survey. So,
all right, next question.
It was.
I'm hijacking this with the basics.
No, please. And by the way, Ben, your audio is not great, so I don't know if there's anything you can do to get closer. You're very soft, which is unusual for you.
How about now?
That's better. That's better.
Okay, I will lean in
and speak loudly.
Speak loudly, and I will make an adjustment while you guys are talking.
Don't be like an evangelical woman.
Yeah, I'm going to lean in like Sheryl Sandberg. Talk to me about what it means to show that these are bad for women, what then produce bad outcomes. What are the sort of questions that you're asking and the sort of answers that you're getting that make that argument?
Okay, so we found what we did. The first thing we did was we read 15 of the best-selling sex and marriage books in evangelicalism. So together, those books had sold roughly 40 million copies. So I don't think people realize how big the publishing industry is in evangelicalism. Like these things are super, they go far. And so we looked at the common teachings and then we measured them. So we asked women, hey, how's your sex life? hey, how's your marriage? Bunch of questions, previously validated question sets for anyone who cares. And then we presented them with a bunch of teachings that are common in evangelicalism, some of which we thought would be helpful, some of which we thought would be harmful, mixed them all up and said, hey, did you ever believe this when you were married, or do you believe it now? And from that, we were able to compare people who did believe stuff with people who didn't and see how it correlated, how it affected them. And so the 4 big harmful teachings that we found, which again are throughout evangelicalism, are a woman is obligated to give her husband sex when he wants it. A wife should have frequent sex to keep her husband from watching pornography. All men struggle with lust. It's every man's battle. And boys will push girls' sexual boundaries, so girls need to be the gatekeeper.
Yeah. Very common.
Okay,
Yeah.
did that fix the audio issue?
Oh, yeah, that's good.
Much better. You still have an echo, but I think that's because you're in your cave there.
Yeah.
But you were getting much louder, so that's good.
Okay, I'm happy to echo loudly. Holly, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Yeah, just to get slightly graphic a little bit, because, we got to do some sexy stuff on morning television, to keep people interested. Sheila, tell the folks the specific harm that it showed, because the data on that compared to the general population for evangelicals is really disturbing.
Yeah. Okay. So here, it's all in this book. Yeah, this is the book we're talking about. This is my first one. So we've done several more since. We have another one coming out in March. But what I'm talking about was all from Great Sex Rescue. So everyone remember the number 47. Okay, so when you go away from this interview, as you're going on with your day, you're going to remember the number 47, because 47 is our orgasm gap. So, and by that I mean that 95% of evangelical men report that they almost always or always orgasm in a given sexual encounter, compared to just 48% of women. Wow. So that's a big orgasm gap.
And what's that in the general population?
It's hard. Okay, so it is hard to tell because we measure frequencies slightly differently. Like we used almost always or always more than half. Some people say usually. So it's like, is almost always or always the same as usually? And I don't know. But when you look at the stats for usually among secular couples, or general population couples, so there would be Christians in there, but general pop, it's more like women are at 63% or 64%. So it's a much lower orgasm gap.
And Laura, I don't know where one of our chat folks has said 22.6, which I assume I don't know where you've gotten that, Laura, but I think that's, she's pulled something from the internet.
Yeah, like the largest study from the GSS survey, where I think it was like 60,000 couples. And when you look at heterosexual couples from that, I think the orgasm gap was around 30 points. So it was lower.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the other big.
Yeah, the big one, and this was our major area of research, is that evangelical women suffer from sexual pain disorders at roughly 2.5 times the rate of the general population. And people don't realize this. Now, it isn't just evangelical women, it's conservative Muslims, conservative Jews as well, Orthodox Jews as well. If anyone's ever seen that, the Orthodox series on Netflix, really, really good. Best depiction of vaginismus I've ever seen in popular media. But yeah, so we have an incidence rate of 23%, 7% to the point that penetration is impossible. And we're actually working on another peer-reviewed paper right now, which shows that obstructed penetration is more related to belief in these tropes than it is abuse. So abuse is really correlated with pain, but not with obstruction. Obstruction is correlated more with belief in these tropes among religious women.
And
yeah.
What has the reaction in the evangelical community been to this data?
Well, we've been blacklisted from the big conferences, the big counseling conferences, because we called out the thing that we did that most people don't do is we called them out by name. Like we quoted people's books, these best-selling people that everyone worships. We called out Focus on the Family. Like we took names, and people didn't like that. But it's been selling really well among women. It's kind of like an underground movement, and people are seeing it. And a lot of pastors are too, but the megachurch pastors have been warning people not to read our books because we're egalitarian. So we actually think women are equal.
Yeah, God forbid egalitarianism. So explain to me, like, I imagine this is the kind of thing that, among other things, would have a real audience in non-evangelical circles, because it's exactly what coastal elites want to believe about evangelicals, and the idea that
That's true.
somebody like you and somebody like would be writing a book like this, and somebody like Holly would be super excited about it.
Hmm.
This is, I mean, but yet I heard about you from Holly, not
Hmm.
your work.
Yeah, we've had a really hard time.
Uh,
We've had a hard time breaking in. Like I really want the coastal elites or just the news organizations to realize that this research is out there. We did just get published in the Journal of Sociology of Religion for some of our stats on sexual pain, which is really exciting. So we are trying to get it in academic journals too. But yeah, I hope people just pick up on this and realize there's a wealth of data in our book, and in our paper and in our subsequent books too, that just shows that this stuff is so widely taught. Like, let me give you an example, okay? Dana Gresh she's a evangelical author who wrote especially for teen girls. She wrote a lot of books for teen girls on maintaining their purity. She ran an event called Secret Keeper Girl all throughout North America. Like, I think 500,000 girls went to that event. And she had a modesty test in her Secret Keeper Girl curriculum. And it was called the Raise and Praise test. So you're supposed to raise your hands up in the air. Okay, so you raise your hands. And if your belly shows when you raise your hands, that's bad. And the reason, and I quote, is because bellies are intoxicating. And then there's this conversation that moms are supposed to have with their daughters about what intoxicating means. And it's kind of like being drunk, or when you get dental anesthesia and you're out of control. And God designed men to be intoxicated by our bodies, but God only wants men to be intoxicated by one body, their wife. And so you don't want to intoxicate another man. This curriculum was aimed at girls ages 8 to 12. So she told 8-year-old girls that the sight of their bellies had the power to make grown men out of control.
Well, I just want to say that the power of my belly to produce out of control reactions is undoubted, and that is why on Dog Shirt TV, I never expose my belly, because
And we're all grateful, I'm sure. Yeah.
and I have received no criticism. No one's written a book about that being a toxic thing.
Yeah.
We have a rule on this show that the audience is allowed to interrupt at any time with its own questions. The great Laura Donna has a
The
question.
great. Oh, I think you're muted.
Oh,
Oh, there you
Oh,
go.
there, you're good. You're good.
oh. There was a question in the chat about maybe it's psychosomatic. And I wondered if you could, I have two questions. I wondered if you could talk through what it means to date when you're young, if you're holding this belief system that you are the one who has to keep things from going too far, and how that would affect your libido once you get
Yeah.
married.
Yeah.
And the other question that goes beyond what I read as I researched you last night is whether this whole attitude of being the vessel that's ready every 72 hours, because 72, that's interesting. In your mind ties to the role of evangelical women in politics, and the just enabling mentality. And Holly, that one's for you too.
Yeah. Okay, well let me do the gatekeeping message first. So girls are taught that boys can't control themselves, right? That there's a point of no return, that they get so sexually aroused that they can't do anything about it. A woman named Shanti Feldon wrote a book called For Young Women Only, where she shared really, really bad stats. I mean, her survey was laughable. It was atrocious. But she asked boys if you're in a makeout situation, how likely are you to stop? And what she concluded is that 82% of boys feel little ability or little responsibility to stop in a makeout situation. So she said to girls, if you want to stop, it's safest to not even start. And my reply would be 100% of boys have the ability and 100% of boys have the responsibility to stop if you say no. And so like it was complete rape culture. It was straight up rape culture. And that's what girls are raised on, is this rape culture. So there you are, you're dating this guy, you're 16 years old, you're making out. And what she is thinking the entire time is he getting too excited? Do I need to stop it yet? 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 So she's like, some women that we interviewed said it was like I was spectatoring, or like I was judging myself, like I was outside of my body and judging myself because I had to watch what was going on. And so she's taught herself to dissociate from her body. And so belief in that thing as a teenager, belief in that trope as a teenager is highly correlated with an inability to get aroused once you're an adult and married. Because you've never learned how to inhabit your body. And, you've also been taught that men are scary and can't control themselves. So it's really destructive.
I want to follow up on this because this is going to really reveal me as a Jew. But, what are we protecting against here in the premarital sex? It's better not to start because you can't stop, and you're the one who's responsible. Is the magic line that we're building a wall around vaginal intercourse, or
yes,
is there some? Oral sex would be okay if you. No. If it didn't progress to vaginal intercourse, like what's the thing that you're trying to protect against here, that requires that young girls take all the responsibility, and what if the young girl comes home and tells her authoritarian father, we did X, Y, Z, A, B, C, but did not progress to blah blah blah. He'd be like, well, you shouldn't have done that because it might have progressed to blah blah blah, but you're fine.
Yeah, well, they're definitely trying to protect from vaginal intercourse. But what happened was in purity culture, which was kind of roughly from 1995 to 2015 in evangelicalism, although it's still there to a certain extent, they really expanded it so that even kissing became a sin. Because anything could lead to sex. So anything that can lead to sex is a sin. So
back in the old days, the Baptists, you can't dance.
Oh yeah, when you can't, you have to do the side hug, like the Christian side hug thing.
Right.
Yeah, it's.
But is dancing itself the sin, or is dancing a sin because it leads to other sins? I'm trying to figure out where's the line between precautionary building a fence around the Torah, as we say, as my people say, and the actual sin.
Yeah, at one point I would probably more like 1975, they would have said that intercourse was a sin. You shouldn't do other things because it'll lead to intercourse, but intercourse is the sin. But during purity culture, it all became sin. The whole thing was sin. So even getting aroused, even having a crush on a boy could be a sign that you weren't loving God enough. It was really a weird time. It was a seriously weird time.
It's really prohibited. Like that is just whoa, you can't do that. That goes back to the 70s.
But the big thing in purity culture is that
if you want to head off actual sex, masturbation is it's the golden key.
Then it's not rational. It's like if you're pro-life, you're also against birth control a lot of times, which makes no sense, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry, Sheila, please.
Yeah, because it really did become all about women bearing the responsibility for men's sin, because women were sin management tools. And I think that's what people need to understand, is that in evangelicalism, women are sin management tools. So marriage is a sin management tool. So, if Doug Wilson famously, who's a really crazy minister in Idaho.
Pete Hegseth.
Pete Hegseth goes to his denomination. Yeah. So Doug Wilson officiated at the marriage of a pedophile to a woman because supposedly this would stop his pedophilic actions. And indeed, the guy got arrested later for sexually abusing his kids and went to jail. So This is the kind of attitude that Pete Hegseth is into, is that women are supposed to stop the proclivities of men. And when you realize that's how they see women, is women are both the causes of men's sin and they are the solution to men's sin. So no responsibility is ever put on the man. And I think that affects not just sex, but all areas of life, which is what you were trying to get to, Laura. Yeah.
Yeah, so in politics, if I can jump in and address, because Sheila's Canadian, so we'll let her off the hook a little bit with American politics. Maybe there's some of this in Canada too. But I think, white evangelicalism is it's a huge influence in American politics, even though it's disproportionate to the numbers because they're so politically involved. And this culture of where women's, submission, there's even among Doug Wilson's branch, actually, church and some other more extreme, there's even talk of they either want to abolish the 19th Amendment or there's a message that women should vote as their husbands vote. They should, the husband gets to decide for the household how you're going to vote. So that's deeply ingrained in their political behavior as well. And it really undercuts, I think one of the big impacts of white evangelicalism on, not only do they vote in disproportionate numbers, but because of a lot of their belief systems, and because they're so homogeneously Republican, and their belief systems undercut some of Democrats' advantages with certain groups. For instance, women, there's a big gender gap, right, in our politics where most women are going to vote Democrat. But see, if you're an evangelical woman, that's undercut for this whole block of people. You're almost certainly going to vote Republican because this is part of the thing. So that's just an example in sort of practical terms for the rest of us, how these beliefs can affect our politics.
Yeah.
All right. I want to make sure that Laura, do you have? I take it you have more.
No. I was just curious. Is the number still 81%, something like that, of
evangelicals who voted? Yeah. It is. It's a confusing number, though, because it gets conflated. Because what's happened since 2016 is a lot of people have left the evangelical church, but the evangelical church is still voting 81% for Trump, right? But a lot of people who would have in 2016 been in that pie are no longer in that pie, and more people are moving into that pie, not because they're converting to actual evangelical beliefs, but because they are, the term evangelical is now become synonymous with cultural Republican. And so people are adopting that term, even if they don't go to church or don't go to evangelical churches. And so it's yes, it's still 81%, but it's not the same pool of people.
Yeah, that's true to some degree. I would encourage you, if you're interested in this question, look at PRRI data. Robert P. Jones, I think he has the best data on this. But they actually, he actually disagree. That you hear that a lot in that, and you see that in a lot of surveys. But according to his data, church attendance actually increases the chances of voting for.
Oh, absolutely it does. I'm just saying that I think what people are missing is that for the first time ever, what year was it? I think it was 2019 or something. The mainline churches attendance started to go up and evangelicalism started to go down. The mainline. So a lot of people are leaving evangelicalism for mainline denominations.
For sure, yeah.
And so there is a bit of a shuffling, but more people are, people are still definitely going to evangelical churches, but there is a shuffling. And I wish people would pay more attention to the fact that there is a large group of people leaving evangelicalism.
Yeah, there definitely is.
And there is going to be a huge shift. If I can make one prediction, and this isn't specifically about politics, but I think it's going to affect evangelical women. If you look historically at the 1960s, we often hear the divorce rate is 50%, right? It's not. It's closer to 35%. The highest the divorce rate has ever been is the early 1970s, and that's because in different states, no-fault divorce came in, right? And it came in largely late 1960s to mid-1970s. No-fault divorce went all across the country. And so there was this pent-up demand for divorce because
right.
there were people in miserable marriages who couldn't get out, especially women. And then as soon as no fault divorce came in, they all got divorced, right? And after no fault divorce, you find that suicide rates went down, but also men dying of accidents went down, which is kind of interesting because a lot more men, like, whoops, they died of accidents before no fault divorce. Anyway, so the idea that there's pent up demand for divorce, and then when suddenly you're allowed to divorce, tons and tons of people divorce. That's what happened, and then the divorce rate has been going down. Well, in evangelicalism, there is a huge pent-up demand for divorce. And
Yep.
what's been holding them back is the idea that it isn't biblical to divorce. I can't divorce for abuse. I can't divorce for all these things. But over the last few years, that's been crumbling, and it's been crumbling quite quickly.
And is the pent-up demand among women, or is the pent-up
Yes.
demand among Pete
No.
Hegseths who,
No, it is among women
permission.
it is among women who are abused, because it looks like the abuse rate in evangelicalism is quite high, probably higher than the general population, especially of emotional abuse. So you've got this pent up demand for divorce, and the theological underpinnings stopping women from getting divorced are coming down. And I think what we're going to see over the next 10 years is a huge surge in evangelical divorces. Oh, shoot. Sorry, I forgot to put Do Not Disturb on.
no worries.
You're good for us.
Okay, good. I had to get rid of my daughter there.
Part of the
They'll
Probably
blame
shouldn't.
that on women. The narrative will be that women are
They will.
sinning and this is a problem and that we need to get under control, but they're not. It's never going to be like, oh, maybe we need to look at our marriage teachings or
Yes.
something like that. So
They will absolutely blame it on women. But here's what I want people to understand is, if one of the best things that we can do is stop, like, if you want to reach evangelical women, stop seeing it as a political thing to reach them and start seeing it as a marriage thing, as a, hey, you are worth something. Like, here is what abuse is. Like, let's start helping evangelical women find their voice in their marriages, and that will translate in other areas. But by seeing this totally as a political thing, like, I have to convince them that their politics are wrong.
Yeah,
it is
yeah.
not going to have an effect as much as telling women, hey, the way you're being treated isn't right.
yeah.
All right.
I think that's why can I just say that I think that's why Sheila's work is actually so revolutionary, because I've seen this in my own, by Laura, I've seen this in my own circles, Sheila, to where they've come across your work, or, maybe through your podcast or the book or whatever. And it's like, that's their sort of, their eyes, that's how they get woke.
Yeah. Yes.
Woke. And then it starts to like seep into, and that's why I think the reaction towards you is so, not physically violent, but it's so strong and like freaked out, because they know this is really subversive. This is really, really subversive stuff.
And the funniest thing was, about a year ago, something went viral on Twitter. I refuse to call it anything other than Twitter, where someone was accusing me of being a full-time Democratic operative, and it had like 1 million views. And I thought this was hilarious because I never talk about politics, and I'm Canadian. Like, I had never talked about politics. Okay, this is the closest I've ever come, is being here right now.
Well, we'll keep it on
We'll
that.
we'll keep it on
Because
the love.
I just don't. But I talk about the problems in the SBC, and so they associated that with being a Democratic operative, because they knew that when women start seeing the truth about their marriages, there is like a lot of other things happen. And this is also a justice issue. There are so many women in abusive marriages. There are so many women who are the victims of marital rape, because they're told they can't say no, and they don't even know how to recognize marital rape. Like, this is a real justice issue. And I just hope that we can, and that's what I just want to do, is I want to rescue people who are stuck in marriages where they're getting raped all the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or where they're just not, fulfilled. I mean, I just think, anyway, I won't go into my personal history, because that's embarrassing and sordid, but I've certainly experienced this in my own life, for sure. So there's been a question in the chat, about Canadian evangelicalism and like crossover there, but I want to like also expand it. Because I grew up in Africa, I'm a missionary kid, and I have seen this teaching. It's global. It's there's been a just writ large, the sort of evangelical American culture has gone global through books and all kinds of consumer, culture kind of items. And I've seen it all over the world, and in places like Africa, actually, it's especially damaging because that's already a culture with poor rule of law and poor women's rights and deep-seated patriarchy. And so I've seen some really sad stuff where American evangelical teaching has come into a culture that's even worse than the American context. And
then they baptize it. They baptize it
yeah,
as
yeah,
biblical.
and it's horribly, horribly damaging. But I wonder if you all could speak to that, or speak to specifically Canada and the overlap between evangelicalism.
Yeah, Canada is really, obviously it's on my heart, and I mourn a lot for what happened to Canadian evangelicalism, because we were actually quite healthy. But American stuff comes up here. And in the 1980s, 1990s, you started to get mass media Christianity,
Yes.
with focus on the family getting big, with big books being written. And so we sort of lost our Canadian evangelical identity, and we became this evangelical, which was largely American evangelical. And so you did see purity culture come in here. We had, for our initial survey of 20,000 women, we had statistically significant results for 6 different countries. So we were able to judge, and I can tell you from best to worst. Well, actually, here, I'm going to let you guess, okay? So the 6 countries were the UK, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the US, and South Africa, with the caveat that South Africa and in the US, we had largely white populations. Okay, so of those 6, what do you think is the best?
New Zealand.
Yeah.
New Zealand, yeah.
New Zealand was the best, and then the UK.
Canada?
Then the UK.
Yeah.
Then Australia and Canada kept switching places depending on how you were measuring it, and then the US, and then South Africa.
Yeah.
So, so it isn't uniform across the world. There are places where it is better. So it is better in Canada than in the US. It is certainly better in New Zealand and in the UK. And when I talk about this stuff, often my British followers are like, this is insane. Like, nobody would ever teach this stuff. This is crazy.
Right.
But
this is South Africa. My sister lives in South Africa, and talk about a rape culture. I mean, just although it's interesting that your respondents were primarily white, because
we just couldn't, that wasn't intentional. We desperately tried to get other races, but the church is so segregated, we couldn't do it.
Yeah, but I mean, I think South Africa is one of the rape capitals of the world. They have, of course, they have a broader crime issue and a rule of law issue, which I think that goes into. Although oddly, they also have an incredibly liberal constitution. It's one of the world's most liberal constitutions. So there's always been a weird gap between South Africa's legal sort of culture, constitutional culture, and sort of popular culture. But that doesn't really surprise me. And in Africa, these ideas are rife. American evangelicalism is everywhere. All the bad stuff gets magnified. I'm just going to tell you one story, which is going to horrify everybody. So I know a missionary who told me now this was an older missionary, but still, like, this is in the past, like, couple decades. But she told me just matter-of-factly, without any sort of squeamishness or apologies, that a woman in one of their congregations had been raped and had been impregnated. And they had her apologize to the congregation. And it's like, to me, and again, like, that's horrific. And I know there's a recent case of this that made the evangelical rounds, of a pregnant woman,
teenager. She was 15.
Yeah, and that's something's up there. So had to apologize to the congregation, but just to, like, put it in the African context, in Africa, women, again, rape is commonplace. Like, women have no marital rape. Women have so few rights. The idea that she could have, that her mistake was this man who was a friend of hers came to her house, and she was alone in her house, and she let him in the door. That was her, and she shouldn't have done that, because that's just too dangerous. And that idea that, like, the idea that she could have, like, not let him in, or it's just preposterous. And there's no legal remedies for rape really in many of these cases and countries. And so to me, that case just demonstrates just the damage, even more damage in other countries of these ideas.
Well, yeah, like if you are a person of faith, then you need the reason you're a person of faith is because you believe that God wants justice and that God brings freedom and that life is better with God, right? And so if these missionaries are going into a country which is heavily patriarchal, which has no women's rights, and then teaches that that is what God wants, they are not bringing freedom. They are not bringing justice. They are cementing the oppression even further. And that is what has happened. I'm constantly getting emails from people in the mission field all over the world where they're saying, you know, the only marriage books we have translated into our language are Love and Respect and Every Man's Battle. And like, is there any way to get your book translated? And I'm like, I have no money. I don't know what to do. We're trying to raise money to translate it. But like, this is what they have to work with. And these books have been like Love and Respect, which is the one that I freaked out about. That's been translated into I don't know how many languages. Like it's the best-selling marriage resource in Latin America in evangelicalism. Like this is scary stuff. This is really everywhere. And so if we don't stop it in the US, it's going to infiltrate all over the world, and it's going to make it already has. Yeah, it already is everywhere. But it cements patriarchy. It cements oppression of women as if it's godly.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so I want to ask about, so Holly describes herself as an ex-evangelical. You describe yourself, I'm curious how this has changed your relationship with evangelicalism. You describe yourself, you use the word we to describe the evangelical community. But you're kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. What is your current relationship with the world in which you grew up and which rejects you and calls you terrible things, but which you're speaking to and is the community that you address?
This is a hard one for me to answer publicly. I will say that I feel like my calling is to speak to the women in evangelicalism who are being hurt. And so I don't want to do anything that will jeopardize that. So I want them to still see me as one of them and as an ally.
Yeah.
Um,
And you know, there are egalitarian evangelicals, you know. I
Yes.
think there's now I will say that
don't get me wrong. I'm not pushing you to say.
No,
never
there's certain things that I'm uncomfortable saying. Like
no, it's fair.
I have made it clear I do go to an Anglican church, and Anglican in Canada would probably be the equivalent of Episcopalian in the US. I know it's a little bit different. So I have left the traditional evangelical church, but we spend all of our lives like in evangelical media, in evangelical spaces.
Yeah.
Because I think one of
Laura is left as goes to an Anglican church now.
Yeah, now she does an actual Anglican, not a
Yeah.
Well, actually, I'm the actual Anglican because we're Church of England, but
Right.
she goes to the anyway. It's all very confusing in the U.S.
That's a whole other story.
But because one of the things that I've seen is when a lot of people leave the evangelical church because they are critiquing it, they leave it so hard that they cannot talk to it anymore. So they talk about evangelicalism, but they don't talk about it to the evangelicals that need to hear. And so I'm still trying to talk to the evangelicals that need to hear.
Yeah, so this is a profound point, and I have a little hobby of reading the literature of people who have left hardcore religious movements. So this includes people like Shalom Auslander, who left hardcore ultra-Orthodox Judaism, you know, people like Ayan Hirsi, right? And who grew up, you know, sort of hardcore Sunni Muslim, and Holly, right? These like people who leave with a and are kind of dissenters, very, very hostile dissenters, and
Hostile?
I'm sorry, Holly. There's never been a note of hostility in what you've said about the world from which you come. Um, um, but one of the things you give up when you do that is the ability to talk within the community, and you end up talking more about the community than to the community. Um, so I think it's a very compelling and interesting choice to sort of retain the sort of relationship where the community is the audience.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. Because,
Yeah, and it's really tough in a religious culture in particular, where in these conservative religious cultures where, conformity is really it's not only just prized, it's like a shibboleth, like it's essential. And so when you start even if you're just questioning or sort of pointing out, like you may not be expelled, but you've got like that's a red flag for people, and you're already a suspicious individual. So, hi,
Auntie Ruokonen joining us from
Finland.
Finland. Religion is stated and moderate and introspective. What's on your mind this morning?
No, I mean, I didn't caught the beginning of your fascinating conversation, but what you said is sort of true about religion in Finland, but there are, these slight cracks here and there.
We're working on it. One
Yeah.
thing at a time. We're going to turn you all insane.
Yeah. But I mean, there's definitely there is an issue with organized religion in Finland too, and part of it has to do with Russian influence,
Interesting.
hybrid operations in Finland, because there's this Lutheran church in the St. Petersburg area of Russia, where there used to be a significant Finnish-speaking minority historically. But most of the Finnish-speaking people have actually emigrated to Finland quite some time ago, and especially with the Moscow's genocidal war on Ukraine, there's really not much of anybody actually Finnish-speaking left in that region, and even most of the sort of financial ties have been either severed or they have been severely curtailed. But there is still a bit of something, and I think the larger issue is that there has been this narrative of Russia being the protector of conservative values and so forth, and there's actually been one issue with our Lutheran Church is that there is actually a sect still through this Russian Lutheran Church that they are actually still not baptizing, but giving official credentials for priests there. And some of them are actually, after that, doing their work in Finland. And that is an issue. And of course, there are also evangelical movements in Finland, and some of them are a bit more conservative than others. There are quite a few of them, but I mean it's too complicated to go into detail now, and I'm not an expert in that field. But Finland is 60% Lutheran still, which is the main religion. There is an Orthodox church also that has official status, and there's about 60 different smaller recognized religions. There's a freedom of religion in Finland, so it's quite easy to set up something new in that regard.
Well,
Yeah,
I will say, oh, sorry, go ahead,
Yeah,
Sheila.
I was just saying, I think people don't realize that part of the appeal of Russia for many of the right-wing people in the U.S. is Russia's view on gender and sexuality. Remember that Russia has decriminalized domestic violence. So a very, very patriarchal view of women, and then there's the whole LGBTQ thing, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't think that people see that evangelicals are very, very vulnerable to Russian propaganda because of the way that Russia talks about the family and gender roles.
Well, and it's intentional, Sheila. I
Yeah.
mean, and Russia has explicitly and specifically reached out to American evangelical groups and leaders with this message. And the ironic thing, I mean, it's more than ironic, it's just preposterous, is that evangelicals are jailed in Russia.
Yeah.
Like that, like they are put in jail because proselytization is not legal actually in Russia. And so the Orthodox Church is the church. And so it's kind of like how Russia has reached out and exploited American conservatives with around guns, like that. Maria Butina, that was NRA was one of the organizations.
It was her principal target.
That's right. She infiltrated the NRA.
And the National Prayer.
You can't have a gun in Russia.
Yeah.
I mean, right, Ben? You can't have a gun in Russia.
Oh,
Can you?
I don't know about that actually.
Maybe a hunting rifle, but I mean, like the guns we have.
I don't know. I don't know about Russian gun law. But one of the things that she said she did was that she set up a Russian kind of NRA type organization that was about gun rights in Russia. And, I think there's if you look at her pattern of activity here, it's about gun rights, it's the National Prayer Breakfast, it's about the relationship between evangelicalism, or in her case, I think evangelicalism through the lens of the Russian Orthodox Church, right? Because of course it's not a culture, it's not Uganda, right? It's not, it's a culture in which there is actually an established national church. And so you're doing a kind of evangelicalism through the lens of a very different sort of church structure.
But the Christian nationalism is the commonality.
Right, because of course, one of the things that the non-Catholic, the Orthodox churches have is that they're national in character, right? The Patriarch Kirill is a Putin guy, and that is that makes the Orthodox churches both quite decentralized compared to the Catholic hierarchy, but also very co-optable for ultra-nationalist purposes. So this actually is a good segue. I'm gonna make you wait a second, Auntie. Sheila, how much, this has come up in the chat and I just want to ventilate it with you. How much is this confined to the evangelical community? And if we had the Catholic Sheila Wray Gregoire on, would we be having the same conversation about Catholicism, or is there something unique in the evangelical culture? I mean, I'm just thinking about it in relation to ultra-Orthodox Judaism, and there's some commonality, some pretty substantial differences. How much is this an evangelical thing, and how much is it a broader conservative religion thing?
It started as an evangelical thing. I have a lot of Catholic followers. I have a lot of Catholic influencers who are sharing all my stuff now because they're saying this is getting increasingly in the Catholic Church too. The book Love and Respect is increasingly being read in the Catholic Church. So, the Catholic Church as a whole is far more liberal than the evangelical church, but there are pockets. And you see that Amy Coney Barrett, right? Like you see those pockets. And those pockets are expanding. And so I do think it's there. It certainly is in the LDS church. I have a lot of LDS people following me and trying to do similar work among the Mormon church. So, it's just there. I think there's a big movement towards more fundamentalism in all of our religious groups. But I think the evangelical influence is very outsized. And so what happens in evangelicalism is going to bleed into all the other ones.
And then I think what you're seeing on the secular side, I think, is again this bro kind of culture that, I mean, because let's just say dominant American or Western, I guess, sexual ethics where sex is, very, casual and, there's, and it's sort of, there's not much of an ethic there. Women and the whole porn culture, I mean, women tend to be exploited in that world too, and bad things happen that way. So there's like a clear bridge that I think has now been bridged in our current politics, which was the topic of the article that I wrote in our previous discussion, of these, this sort of hyper masculine bro culture that we're seeing that is very secular and offensive to evangelicals would be, but there's the view of women and sex is actually quite similar.
Yeah. Evangelicals have a pornified view of sex. They just do. It's no different. You see women as objects. You see men as entitled to women's bodies, and it's all the same. Yeah.
Auntie, you get the last 4 minutes are yours.
Yeah, so I was just going to note that apart from otherwise being conservative, these priests that have come out of this Russian influence schooling they are basically totally against women priests. That's one defining feature that runs through them. I just wanted to note that.
Yeah.
Well, I am also totally against women priests because I don't believe in the priesthood. Now, the day I am a Levi,
you have bigger problems.
No. I'm a Levi, and Levies are the temple keepers. The day we bring back the temple and we have priests again, everybody named Cohen, Kahane, Khan, Kahana, all these people, Cain, these are priests. And I'm going to have to wash their hands.
Oh.
And, because that whole ritual hand washing, that's the Levi's job. We have to prepare the priest to make the sacrifice. I don't want to do that. It's bad enough for me to have to wash my own hands. I don't want to have to wash other people's hands because their name is Cohen. So I'm against priests. I don't want to bring back animal sacrifice. So we don't need priests. And if you want to double the number by making women priests, and I'm going to have to wash their hands too, I'm against it.
You're against it.
Count me with the Finnish conservative Lutherans infected by Russia. I'm against women in the priesthood. I'm also against men in the priesthood.
But you just taught me something as an evangelical that I didn't know, which is I've always said Levi.
So the word in Hebrew is Levi.
Isn't that interesting? What about you? Did you say Levi too, Holly?
Oh yeah, Levi. I was Levi. In fact, I didn't know what you were talking about.
Yeah. So the Levites are the descendants of Aharon, the high priest.
Oh, we know who Levites are. Levites are.
The Kohanim are the descendants of Aharon. They are of the tribe of Levi, and Levi is really the only tribe that has persisted, and it's persisted because of the name. Levi, Levite, Levitas, all of these are, and my name, which is Wittis, but we used to have a L in front of it, Levitas.
Oh, wow.
And so the Levi names are, and the Kohen names were retained and became surnames, but really they were just ways of remembering who was part of which line so that when the temple is restored, these roles can be reestablished.
Right.
So it would be like Auntie the Cohen. And in fact, sometimes the name actually in Hebrew is HaKohen, the Kohen, or HaLevi. And so these are the only traditional status names that are retained in Judaism, and they're retained because they have Messianic era roles that are, defined in the Torah, and you need to know who's going to actually do the sacrifice. So it's very important to know who's a Cohen, who's a Levi. But I just want to say, as a Levi, I don't want to.
No priests.
They're
Yeah.
basically janitors.
Okay.
And
Well, in the
I
Christian
don't want
tradition,
to sweep out the
animal
temple for a living. I'm
sacrifice.
a writer. None of this has any appeal to me. So keep women out of the priesthood. Keep men out of the priesthood.
The Jewish priesthood. In Christianity, we don't wash their hands. They're responsible for their own hands, and we don't kill animals.
In Christianity, the notion of the priesthood is all
We
corrupted.
do wash feet.
It's all distorted. There's no temple. You're not. And so the priest.
Your body is a temple, especially women's bodies. That's why very clean.
Your body is a temptress. I mean, my body is a temple, and you're for protecting me from myself.
Right.
Guys, we're going to leave it there. Sheila Wray Gregoire, I would say you're a great American, except you're a great Canadian. And you are welcome back anytime.
Thank you.
For joining us. Holly, Berkley, Fletcher, what a great idea this was. Our eyes and ears in evangelical culture. Please, let's do this again. Folks, we're going to be back tomorrow. Got no idea who the guest is going to be. Got no idea who the.
I'll come on. I'll come on, Ben, because I have an idea. So.
All right, we're going to talk to Holly about her idea, folks. I want you, when this episode is up on YouTube later today, share it, because I think this is a conversation that just we wouldn't have had except for the really cool, interesting diversity of this community. And let's spread it around. Keep the faith. See you tomorrow.